Okay, so we've managed to render out our image. We've got our full frame image now into Photoshop, and it's looking pretty good already. We've got nice composition, nice lighting on it, some good shadows, and we've got some little anomalies on the objects there. You can see some sort of deformation issues we had. So we're just gonna. I think the first job is to paint those away. So I'm just gonna choose um, a little square brush, which is my favorite brush currently. So I'm using that quite a lot. I'm just gonna set that down and then start to paint a little bit. I only really ever paint around 40 or 50% and just pick some colors straight from the original image, and then just try to repair where the shadows look a bit strange, or where there's some pixelation, or where the geometry didn't quite um, come through correctly. So let's just try to get and paint those out a little bit. Always trying to pick colors off the canvas that we have already, which is a good help for us, just to maintain the colors that we have already. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, as we'll be going over it anyway with some photo layover and some other painting as well. So just trying to tidy it up a little, especially up here. All the way up. Shift click for a straight line in Photoshop. Little tip. Trying to blend in with what we've got already is the best way to approach this, I think. There we go. And this side also. Still probably a little bit too blue on this side, the shadows, but we're going to be, I think the next stage after this is to do some color corrections on it, and just to get it to a place where we're really happy with how everything's looking, because at the moment there's still some stuff that we need to repair and need to go through. And so you can use any basic brush for this. It's nothing special, standard Photoshop brushes, which is all I'm going to be using in, well, there's one or two later which you can download from the internet. Do Google searches for any of the brushes that I'm using, or you can make your own even. But this is just a really standard one. Just use those nice highlights just to paint it up. So it gives it a nice underlaying painterly feel as well, which is always nice to have. Touch up. I don't really want to spend too much time doing this, just to get rid of the obvious stuff. not seem like I'm actually painting in some areas because I've set the opacity quite low, but it's more about blending in this stage than anything else, really. I'm not trying to be too accurate either. Doesn't matter if it goes over a little bit. Let's try to join those, that sun highlighted area together. Okay, and then we'll save that. Okay, so the next stage is to add my group of layers which I use for color correction. So these are standard things that I use, and I just simply copy them from the last render I did into the new render I did. So it adds in some continuity between each of my renders about how I want the colors to be treated and how I want them to look. So I generally use 4 or 5 layers for this, just so I can flick between and sort of alter the properties. So the first one is the channels, which you're gonna have to experiment yourself with. That looks a little bit maybe too blue. Let's see. But you have to go through each of the layers and just tweak and just see what works for you. There's a gradient I add there normally, just to boost out some of the colors a little bit. Play with the opacity of each layer. None of the layers are 100%. And just go through each one. I think that's looking quite nice. Color balance, altering the color values. Okay, that's giving it a nice sort of yellowy red tone. So deserty kind of change to it. We've now lost the overly blue shadows which we had. The next layer is the saturation and vibrance, which will just tone down the color values in it, which I quite like, to desaturate the image a little bit. And then finally a curves layer, which will just boost out the brightness a little bit, just making it a bit more contrasty, a little bit more dramatic. So then I can enable or disable the layers through the group, and that looks pretty good to me if they're enabled. But again, this is something that you have to tweak and you have to try yourself and just experiment with what works. When you've found what works, I then take it into my next render, again tweak it, change it, and see how we get on. Okay, so let's just organize things a little bit here. That's our first paint. This one will be our rock. So now we've got our alpha map from the original 3D render, which is going to allow us to paint on the rocks part. It's actually an old alpha layer because we've got a silhouette in the top left corner, and then there's our spaceship. So these are very useful maps which are rendered natively through the 3D software, so you should be able to do this quite a lot. We can then select the color range, which will allow us to only paint on the rocks. So let's try this again. There'll be some crossover onto the ship, but I'm not really too bothered about that. Always better to paint it out by hand if we want. So I've got a few pictures here. Let's try this one. Some big mountains, some good textures there. It's quite a good resolution. So I'm gonna try using this image. Let's copy that. Paste that onto our rocks layer. So let's just alter the scale of that, scale it down, transform it down, so we can shift it up. Okay, and now we'll go and set that to overlay. Okay, that seems to work. We've got some nice looking texture there on the rock. Again, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes not, and you have to really tweak the image before you bring it in to make it set. Sometimes overlay doesn't work. Sometimes it's hard work, but I got a bit lucky here. I'm gonna go back and just select that, and then we can delete that out from my sky. So now we're left with our rock texture, which we quite like. So I'm going to clone stamp again, same brush. I'll set that to quite 80%, and then we'll just I selected the wrong thing, but we'll just take the existing texture and then we'll clone it onto the thing. I just need to select the mask again. Okay, we don't want to go over and outside, so there we go. That looks good. And then we'll continue to do this on most of the rocky sections of the image, just varying the size of the brush a little bit. We don't want any apparent or quite obvious clonings. I'm just going to paint out some of the rock textures. I really like that one on there, so let's just get rid of that. It's nice to leave a little bit underlying, just so he's a hint of texture just underneath whatever we're going to add on there. I wanted that, or the front part of the image, to be a little bit sandier, a little bit gravelier than the full rocks, but just by leaving a little bit of texture underneath, it adds a little something to it. So with that right peak, I'm quite happy with that. Just test about the overlay, seems to work quite well. It fits in with the lighting that we have as well. So let's paste it in again. We'll just flip that and we'll start on the other side. Transform again. And let's try to get a central peak using similar texture. Again, same method. We'll set it to overlay and try to find a bit of it that works. Let's just check that. And then same method, selecting the black part of the image, which we can then delete out. And we'll just rub out this top layer from what we did on the layer below. Same on the ship. Let's get rid of that. And we can select, actually it's better to select, as it's quite complicated, the black part of the image and then inverse the selection. So rather than trying to select the white on that, it's just looks a bit more complicated. Just do that, which I forgot to do on the other layer actually. Again, just doesn't matter if you leave a little bit, there's always sort of, you might just add something to it. Okay, select the rocks. And then we'll do our painting again. What's happening? Looking good. Let's try and get that obvious crack out of the way. There we go. So then we use the same process for the other peaks as well, and for the other rock parts. It's a little bit over there, but no problem, we can Control Z, always useful. I'm really happy with what that was, but we can go back and clone it over the other sections, no problem. bit more painting. Okay. So we'll just continue to get rid of that. We've got our sky section, which is still in here from the other image, which I forgot about. So yeah, I'm not super happy with that actually. So we'll paste it back in and see if we can redo that. It's all about never really get things the first time. It's all about going back and just taking time. It's all patient thing to have to do. Let's try to get the texture a little bit. We've still got the sky there on our underlying image, which is what's confusing me. Okay, there we go. Let's get rid of that. Alright, that looks better. I like those little gravelly rocks at the bottom as well. Let's see if we can use those just on the bottom maybe. Okay. And then again using the mask to delete it out. Again delete this. Just erasing the top part over the stuff that we've already overlaid. Again from the ship. And clone stamp. Okay, that's looking a lot better now. Over our cliffs over there on the left. Just trying to vary the texture a little bit. And then we'll just flatten that layer down. And there we go. So I've completed the other rocks on the left now as well, just to skip forward a bit for you. So you can see the texture there. It's not in overlay mode, which is why it looks out of place. Let's finish off the stamping. So when we set it back to overlay, there we go. So we've used the same, just one image to do all the textures, so it's keeping the continuity through, a sort of little bit of fading out just at the bottom there where it meets what I think will be a sandier kind of texture. Just erase a little bit on the right side. Now for the foreground. I want that to be sort of deserty, sandy kind of thing. So let's load in our sandy texture. Okay, it's just another landscape shot, but that's a nice sort of looking texture for what I want in the foreground. So we'll just copy that in, and there it is. We'll just transform the scale and size of that a little bit. Move that to where we want it to be, probably about there. Okay, let's get rid of the sky, we don't need that. And then again, overlay mode. Okay, again we got lucky, that seems to work quite well. You would normally have to test the other layer modes, test the other color variations just to see what would happen, how it would look. Sometimes they don't work, sometimes, as I said, you have to go back and do stuff to treat the image. But as it's only a conceptual image, we're not doing a full matte painting or anything, then we don't need to be too bothered about if it's exact, or it's actually sometimes a little bit more interesting if it doesn't look exact, or if it's not photoreal, some sort of mood or color is maybe a little bit better than having photoreal stuff. So we're just going to rub out the stuff on the ship there from that layer, and then I'm just setting it a little bit lower opacity just to leave some of the texture on there as a help to blend it in with the rock layer above. So let's just do that, and then on the sides as well. We can always paint in again after if we miss some or if we go over some. Just get rid of the edges. Let's start stamp. Let's just try a different brush, like a comb brush almost. Maybe produce some sort of sandy, deserty texture. Let's just have a look, see how that works. We don't want to make it too obvious that we're cloning the landscape, so we need to avoid any duplications of that. So let's just try a little bit of painting, but just to sort of blend it in a little bit. Let's use our other brush, maybe something with a little bit of texture on it. Okay, it's maybe working a little better. Still at 70%. Looking quite nice. Yeah, especially around the rocks and the sand there. Move it up a bit maybe. Just using some circular strokes, nothing too fancy. It's beginning to look good. And same on this side. Just cloning that sandy area, just to add a little bit on the bank. There's a little bit of repetition we can see there, but let's just try to get rid of those areas. And then last one maybe. And you can see how we left the texture underneath it. It's still having a little bit of effect. Still making it look quite nice, that sort of painterly effect we've got there. All we're doing is kind of cloning the color really and letting the texture on the brush do a little bit of work. Okay, we'll make a new layer outside of our color treatment group, so right on top of everything, and this is let's just do some simple painting. Square brush again, same brush. 50% opacity, and then we'll just fill in the gaps with this. Not really too worried about textures or anything, just simply filling in the color. But it's beginning to look quite nice. Just adding little highlights there. Just going over where the cloning is quite obvious, and just trying to give it a natural look. Similar technique to what we did with just the first paint layer where we sort of blended everything in. This is kind of what we're trying to do here. It's beginning to look quite nice. It's starting to come together a little bit more now. Just adding some softer shadows in. Go back to our front layer. Let's just name that correctly. I like to work with smaller brushes just for the details. Yeah, let's just choose all layers just for our clone. Filling in little spots. Like I said, we're not looking for anything that's too photoreal, as it's only conceptual stuff, so it's not a matte painting, it's not going to be used in a movie, so we're not too bothered if there's some loose edges. I get the color there that I want. And just trying to pick colors off the canvas, clone bits off the canvas, just to keep the color consistent and the textures consistent. Be in sun, that would be in shade. Okay, so we're almost there, I think. A little bit under the ship, maybe. That'd be a bit darker. I'll just touch it up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so let's name that layer, and then that's our landscape done.